What is up, guys? Welcome back to my reaction channel. It's your boy Chris, and we're gonna continue where we left off before. Yeah, the American Civil War Part 2 by Oversimplified. Before I get into it though, I did some digging about Robert E. Lee. You know, I found out he's actually a veteran from Mexican War. Correct me if I'm wrong. One of the most skilled general at that time. So yeah, it's a pretty big shot though. Anyways, like the video guys, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell button for post notifications. With that being said, let's get into the intro.
This video was made possible by Honey. Stick around to learn how you can save money when you shop online. As the Union struggle to take control in the East continued, elsewhere, the war raged on. The Confederates attempted an invasion of Kentucky, hoping the state as a whole would join them, but they were pushed back. The Indian Territory saw Native American tribes ally with one side or the other in the hopes of securing rights after the war. Along the Mississippi, General Ulysses S. Grant remained one of the few Union generals scoring major victories. With his best pal, General Sherman, by his side, Grant led his armies down the Mississippi
that
to the
idiot
Confederate
McClellan,
stronghold
though.
of Vicksburg. Both sides knew that if Vicksburg fell, the Confederacy would be split in two, and the Confederates prepared for an intense defense of the city. But back in the East, Lincoln still wanted somebody to march south and take Richmond. Having given General McClellan the boot, he needed a new man in charge. All right, Mr. President, option 1 is General Hooker. Bit of a nutcase, but a good general. Option 2, his qualifications are his name is Burnside, and he has freaking dope-ass sideburns. Say no more. So General Burnside was put in charge of the Army of the Potomac and sent south. Lincoln hoped he finally had a general who could succeed. Burnside met General Lee at the city of Fredericksburg, where he intended to rapidly cross the river and take the city. But the Union War Department was too slow in delivering the pontoon bridges, and the two sides were forced to camp across from each other, close enough to speak. Hey Yankee, ready to get your butt kicked? Yeah, right, rebel. God is on our side. No way, God's on our side. Oh, you think so? Well, why don't we ask him? Hey God, whose side are you on? Ow. Dude, I'm cool. With over 100,000 men, the Union Army finally launched their massive attack on the 11th of December. But by now, the Confederates had amassed their forces. During the battle, wave after wave of brave Union men marched headlong into a brutal Confederate onslaught. Even the Confederates couldn't believe what they were seeing, and in one moment of camaraderie, a Confederate sergeant, unable to take it, reportedly came out into the field to tend to the Union wounded. Seeing this, the Union troops held their fire. Still, Burnside and his forces were soundly defeated at Fredericksburg and forced to retreat. Lincoln's popularity and Northern morale continued to plummet, especially as the winter heading into 1863 was bad. The winter camps were rife with disease. The food was less than appealing. On both sides, men began to leave. Hey, where do you think you're going? I'm deserting. What? Don't you love your country? Yes, I do. And I'm trying to get back to it as quick as I can.
Boss. Guys, what is the punishment for deserting back then? Because I think if you desert in the army to these days, you get arrested, right? Like, you get in jail. But back then, should be death, right? Like, should be death, right? Like, I don't know.
Lincoln, ever the kind and caring man he was, spent much of his time pardoning deserters' death sentences. Oh my. He was a 17-year-old boy sentenced to be hanged.
Yeah, that sentence.
I'd better suspend his sentence. Or he'll be suspended tomorrow. What? To try to keep the numbers up, both sides had introduced conscription. There was controversy in the North, however, since rich men could simply pay to have someone else fight on their behalf. Riots broke out in New York City with enraged mobs, furious at the idea of going to fight for slaves, an idea that many of them simply did not support. However, after so much pressure, the Union had finally begun allowing black men to enlist, and these men, knowing what they were fighting for, signed up. By the end of the war, nearly 200,000 troops, 10% of the Union Army, would be black. The valor and bravery they showed throughout, silencing critics. Okay, well that last guy was useless. Let's try this Hooker fella.
Pause, guys, pause. If you just did that too earlier than what it was, like this, you guys have a lot of victories, you know what I'm saying? Because you have a lot of numbers. You're also fighting for the cause of these people. And these people has a lot more reason to fight because they want to be free. So yeah.
General Joseph Hooker was put in charge of the Army
You
of the
just
Potomac,
did it too
and
early,
once again,
bro.
Lincoln ordered him to move south and take Richmond. Hooker met Lee at the Battle of Chancellorsville, where Hooker had over twice the men Lee did. Lee was forced to defy all military convention and split his smaller force into two. Lee had absolutely no chance of winning,
bro.
and
Lee is an
won.
ace, bro.
It was his
Telling you.
masterpiece. Lee did
He's
suffer
just in the
one
wrong
significant
camp.
loss during the battle, though. As his right-hand man, Stonewall Jackson,
Bro.
was riding back to the Confederate lines at night, the nervous Confederate troops, unable to recognize him, opened fire.
What the fuck?
You boys done goofed up. Jackson died 8 days later. As for Lincoln, he
Bro,
couldn't
what?
believe it. It was yet another loss, and Northern support continued to waver. While the Union kept on struggling in the East, out west, unconditional surrender Grant was making moves as always. In an attempt to take Vicksburg on the Mississippi, he
Unconditional.
made a series of risky and bold
Bro,
movements. He
it
sent a
still
cavalry
cracks
wing
me up
and
with
detained
those
Sherman north to
titles.
confuse the enemy. Then, aided by a fleet of ironclads on the river, he raced his army south to cross the Mississippi. Aware that the terrain to the north was restrictive, instead, he
He's gonna
strategically
flank
moved
them.
northeast, hitting Vicksburg's supply line and defending his rear from
Yeah.
Confederate armies in Jackson. Once he reached Vicksburg, the Confederate defense became hardened, and Grant was forced to settle in for a month-long siege, during which time he got rather
Okay.
bored. Despite not taking the city, Lincoln loved it and encouraged Grant to hold firm. It would only be
Bro,
a
it
matter of
seems
time
that there's
before the
only
Mississippi
one good
was in the
general
Union
in
hands.
Lincoln's camp, you
Around
know?
this time, the people
This
in the
Grant
west
guy.
of Virginia, who had remained loyal to the Union throughout, finally broke away to form their own state. They could have named it anything
Ooh.
in the world, but the creative minds at the time came up with the ingenious West Virginia. Back in Washington, Lincoln once again wanted a new general to take command. Oh my goodness, why do all these 19th century generals look so bust? Look, we got Sleepy Eyes Joe here. That's Princess Leia with a mustache.
Sleepy
E.T. phoned the doctor. Fine, why don't we give Snapping
Sleepy
Turtle
Eyes
McGee
Joe,
here a
what
shot?
the fuck?
So General Snapping Turtle McGee was put in charge of the Army of the Potomac. And
Snapping
it was a crucial time for the Union, because once again, the Confederates decided to
Pause. Bro, I'm pausing a lot on this one, but hey, is this a thing back then? Like, you Americans really, bro? Snapping turtle, what the fuck? Bro, what are these titles, bro? Where are they coming from?
go
Shit.
on the attack. So far, they had done exceedingly well militarily, but as the war kept going, the
Okay.
Confederate economy was crumbling. Riots broke out in the streets of Richmond as the price of bread skyrocketed.
Oh, that's not
Supplies
good.
were dwindling. Jefferson Davis wanted to send men west
guys
to rescue
fucked up.
Vicksburg, but General Lee knew the longer the war lasted, the worse their chances got. And he still hoped if he could just threaten D.C., the already demoralized North would surrender. So in June 1863,
not
with the
gonna
momentum
happen.
behind him, General Lee once again entered the North, fighting his way through Maryland and
Bro,
into
this
Pennsylvania.
dude, bro, I'm telling you,
General
if-
Meade
if-
set out
if
to meet
only he
him for
was
what
in
would
the
be the most
Union
significant
side, you know what
battle
I'm saying?
of the entire war. If the Confederates won, D.C. could fall. If the Union won, it would be a turning point, as the Confederates would run out of
Oh,
steam,
shit.
and the small town that was to get caught up in the crossfire of the largest battle in American history was Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. On June 1st, units from each army encountered one another and skirmished through the town itself. The townspeople were forced to take refuge, except for one man who reportedly ran outside for a strange reason. Joseph, what are you
What the
doing?
fuck?
I'm not gonna let them
Oh,
take
yeah.
my beans. How many times do I have to tell you they're not here for your beans? By the second day, over 100,000 men stretched for miles across the battlefield. Lee took the initiative, deciding to hit the enemy's flanks, and he came very close to breaking through the Union's disorganized left. But Union Colonel Joshua Chamberlain ordered a desperate bayonet charge, smashing into the Confederates
Oh, shit.
and forcing them back. The Union forces held across the line. On the final day, Lee believed the Union Army had fortified its flanks, so he decided to finish them off with one massive central assault. The Confederates rushed at the Union lines during General Pickett's charge, and this time, it was the Union's turn to unleash hell. Meade had correctly guessed Lee's strategy, and the Confederates were decimated, forced to turn and flee.
Bro.
A devastated General Lee called out to his
That
fleeing
was
and
lost
wounded
on
men,
this guy,
telling
bro.
them it was his fault.
Yeah.
And after holding for a counterattack that never came, he ordered a retreat back into Virginia. The North had just managed to score a massive
That
victory.
dude, bro,
and
he-
one they
I'm
desperately
telling you, if
needed.
if
And
only he
that
was in the
enough,
Union
in the
camp,
West,
though, like
after a
shit.
month-long siege,
This guy
Vicksburg
crazy as hell,
finally
bro.
fell. The North now held
He's
the
so good at
Mississippi. And
doing
better
shit,
yet,
you know what I'm
it was
saying?
the 4th of July. With control of the Mississippi, Union forces moved into Arkansas and Tennessee. Tennessee in particular saw heavy fighting, with Union General Rosecrans masterfully pushing Braxton Bragg's Army of the Tennessee out of Tennessee. He suffered a major setback, however, at the bloody Battle of Chickamauga and ended up under a Confederate siege at Chattanooga. At one point during the siege, a temporary truce was declared so that wounded men could be recovered. And often in the Civil War, during these small truces, men from both sides would meet in the middle to trade things like tobacco, coffee, and maybe even honey. Do you like honey? Me too. Bees are great. And
This
you know what
reminds me
honey?
so much of
Money. Did you know honey can
historians
help
when
you
it comes
save
to
money? Let me explain.
ads, though.
Honey is a free
Shit.
browser extension that automatically finds you the best coupon codes when you buy stuff online for free. For example, here I am purchasing 100 pepperoni pizzas because what the heck, I do what I want. With just a click of a button, I've saved $210.
Okay.
Nice. Honey works with over 30,000 websites, including eBay, Target, and Expedia, and it's already found Oversimplified subscribers over $46,000 in savings. It takes just 2 clicks to install, and better yet, it's absolutely, positively, 100% free. Get Honey now and start saving money by clicking on the link in the description below. Joinhoney.com/oversimplified. That's joinhoney.com/oversimplified. And as always, you'll be supporting my channel. So thank you. Now where was I? Oh yeah, Vicksburg, 4th of July, and the Siege of Chattanooga. Thankfully, General Grant, now in charge of all Western Union armies, showed up and karate kicked Bragg right back into Georgia. Like this. With Sherman and Hooker, Grant took on Confederate positions in the mountains around the city, including the famous battle above the clouds and Mission Ridge. Grant continued to be Lincoln's #1 guy. With these victories, Lincoln hoped the war was finally turning. Back in Gettysburg, the entire town had been turned into a hospital to care for the scores of wounded men. Throughout the war, on both sides, women such as Clara Barton rose to the occasion, doing crucial work on the home front and volunteering as nurses for those who had given their lives. A new national cemetery was to be established at Gettysburg, and Abraham Lincoln traveled out to attend the opening ceremony. At the event, the main speaker spoke for 2 hours. Then, Abraham Lincoln was called forward to give some brief, appropriate remarks. In just 2 minutes, he masterfully and poignantly iterated America's national purpose and the need to continue the fight. The Gettysburg Address would become one of the most famous speeches in American history.
Becoming more and
While they
more
were now making
popular to
progress,
the people,
the North still couldn't find a
because of the
decisive
war.
victory in the East, and that was bad news for
he's
Lincoln
losing
because his presidency
a lot,
was now in its 4th
really.
year. In 1864, there was an election coming. The Confederates knew this too, and with little hope left of being able to threaten the North militarily, they believed their last shot at victory may be in the election, since Lincoln, emancipation, and the war itself weren't exactly popular. People in the North were sick of war and wanted to put it behind them. Robert E. Lee hoped that if he could just hold out and continue to inflict more defeats, the people of the North would vote Lincoln out and replace him with a Southern sympathizer who may be willing to negotiate. Lincoln knew now he desperately needed a victory. Now, I know what you're thinking.
So that's
but
the plan,
oversimplify.
okay.
If Lincoln loves General Grant so much, then why doesn't he put him in charge of the campaign in the East? Well, guess what, loyal subscriber? You've hit the nail on the head. You're bold, Grant. I'll grant you that. I'm promoting you to General-in-Chief, and I ain't taking you for granted. Now, I want you to go defeat Lee. Grant, be my wish. Please stop. So Grant was put in charge, and he came up with a new plan. He wanted to press the Confederates on all fronts, with General Banks to capture Mobile, Alabama, General Sherman moving south to Atlanta, and Grant joining the Army of the Potomac as they advanced through Virginia. In May 1864, that plan went into action. Sherman steadily advanced on Atlanta, facing off against the smaller Confederate army under General Joseph E. Johnston. In addition, a cruel yet highly skilled cavalry general and winner of the funniest Confederate statue award, Nathan Bedford Forrest, was also nearby, doing his best to threaten Sherman's advance. But in a series of battles, Sherman dominated and pushed Johnson back to the city. But he was held just outside of Atlanta itself and was forced to lay siege. Meanwhile, the main show was happening to the east in Virginia. The Union's top general was finally about to face off against the Confederacy. Lincoln hoped Grant would bring something new to the eastern field and bring something new. He did. As Grant began moving south, Lee still regularly outmaneuvered him and inflicted heavy casualties, hoping to demoralize the North as much as he could. But here's what set Grant apart from others. He knew Lee was running out of men and that the North by comparison had plenty. Grant would throw his forces at Lee, and even when Lee repelled them, Grant, rather than pulling back, would give the order to keep moving forward and flank Lee, again and again.
Pause. So here's the thing. The only reason Grant was winning against Lee is because he has a lot of people in him. because he outnumbers Lee. So if Lee has more, equal people, what I'm saying? I don't think Grant can take this one.
6 weeks, 80,000 men would be killed, wounded, or missing.
The
In
fuck?
DC, Grant was criticized for being a
55,000.
butcher. At the Battle of the Wilderness, the Union casualties were so heavy that Grant reportedly began to weep. But still, Grant could replace his losses. Lee couldn't,
Ooh,
and he
yeah.
was being pushed all the way back to Richmond. Lee knew once he got there, he'd be under siege. Then, it would only be a matter of time. Close to Richmond, Grant again
Yeah, it's gonna
suffered
be
horrific
bad.
casualties in a miscalculated assault at Cold Harbor. Then, trying to be a trickster, instead of moving on Richmond directly, Grant moved towards Petersburg to flank the Confederate capital and cut its supply line. But, just like Sherman, Grant was halted outside of the city, and he too was forced to settle in
siege.
for a siege. Two identical sieges would not be good enough for Lincoln's re-election. The people of the North saw the casualties Grant had been taking, and they weren't happy. To make matters worse, Lee had sent Jubal Early north to threaten D.C. with the hope of forcing Grant
So
to
it's,
withdraw troops from Richmond.
yeah,
Early was
it's a race
repelled on the
against
outskirts
time
of the
now.
city, with President Lincoln even attending as an observer, but the North had been given a fright.
What the fuck?
So with the war currently in a stalemate, who was to be Lincoln's opponent in the critical 1864 election? Who would the Democrats choose? Guess what, baby? I'm back. That's right. General George B. McClellan will run for president against Abraham Lincoln, my fellow
McClellan,
countrymen.
of course.
If you elect me, I, the great General George McClellan, will fearlessly
Bro,
and valiantly
what
win
the
the war.
fuck?
Unlike this douchebag.
Pause. Who is this idiot, bro? He reminds me so much of that traitor from American Revolution. Who's that guy again? His name though? Yeah. You know what? Never mind, bro. Like, he reminds me so much of that Benedict Arnold, right? He reminds me so much of this idiot McClellan, bro.
Many
Shit.
Democrats, however, including McClellan's running mate, wanted to end the war, so it's possible McClellan may have ended up fearlessly and valiantly making peace with the Confederates, which is exactly what they were hoping for. With the war in a stalemate
No.
and Lincoln still not popular, it looked like McClellan
Ain't
would
gonna
win,
happen, though.
and the Confederacy may have a chance at surviving after all. Lincoln himself said that without some kind of major victory, it seemed exceedingly probable that this administration will not be re-elected. Well, fret not, Abe, because if it's a
Okay.
major victory you want, it's a major victory you'll get. Atlanta had been under siege by General Sherman for just over a month. After a number of battles around the city, Sherman sent a force south to sever the city's supply line, and Confederate General Hood was forced to abandon it. Atlanta, one of the Confederacy's
Heh.
most important cities,
It was
had
captured
fallen
now,
into
huh?
Union hands. For many, it was clear that the Confederacy's defeat was now inevitable, and the war would soon be over. When the final results came in, Lincoln had won with an electoral college landslide, with the troops in particular
Psych.
voting overwhelmingly for Lincoln, which must have been touching for their commander-in-chief. Hey man, looks like you lost. No hard feelings? I didn't lose. I merely failed to win. In January, Lincoln involved himself heavily in ensuring the 13th Amendment made it through Congress. In a narrow and historic vote, the amendment passed. Slavery would now be constitutionally banished throughout the nation. Black men and women, watching the vote from the galleries, knew the work had only just begun. A couple months later, at his second inauguration, with victory right around the corner, he didn't celebrate, he didn't gloat. Instead, he emphasized the need for reunification and binding up wounds. To him, Americans, North or South, were to again be compatriots. However, listening to Lincoln
Yeah.
speak that day was a man who had no interest in reunification.
Oh,
John
yeah.
Wilkes Booth, an actor living in D.C., was also
Bullets.
a deep Southern sympathizer. And as the war turned against the Confederacy, depressed and full of hate, he was already plotting his revenge on the man he held responsible. With further Confederate losses, it was pretty clear at this point who
Why
would win.
though?
But still,
I mean,
Jefferson Davis showed
what's-
no
what are you
sign
gonna
of
achieve
giving
by
in.
killing
The
him?
North were frustrated to see the
They just made
conflict
him a
being
martyr.
dragged out. Why waste more lives? In Atlanta, General Sherman believed he had the key to forcing the Confederacy's hand. He had an unusually modern concept that an army could only survive with the support of the people. Strike at the people, and the army collapses. Sherman decided to do something unprecedented. He would remove his 62,000 men from their supply line and march through the heartland of the Confederacy, where they would live off the land. There, they would wreak havoc.
Okay.
As they marched, they tore up railroads, burned farms, and destroyed communication lines. They also
Oh
liberated
shit.
thousands of slaves. The damage done was estimated at $1.4 billion. The tactics were cruel, but to Sherman, it was better than losing yet more
It's
men in
effective
battle.
though.
In December, he reached Savannah, Georgia, but he wasn't done yet. Next, he turned north to
So
inflict
he's
his
using
punishment
a
on the first state to
scorch earth,
secede,
scorch
South
earth
Carolina.
tactics. Is that
As
what
he
they
moved,
call it?
he came ever closer to General Lee's army, still holding out at Petersburg. The siege of Petersburg had lasted for 292 days. 60,000 of Lee's men had deserted. Numerous Union attempts to break through had failed, but when the breakthrough finally came, it came quick. On April 2nd, a Union assault finally pushed the Confederates from their defenses. Hey man, there's no need to evacuate,
Oh,
right?
shit.
You'll rescue us like last time, right? Sorry, can't hear you.
Uh,
Lee narrowly escaped the city,
No.
hoping he'd be able to meet up with General Johnson and continue the fight. Grant chased him down. Richmond was evacuated, and Jefferson Davis went on the run. As they left, the Confederates set fire to military buildings, but the flames burnt out of control, and as the Union troops arrived, they became firefighters. A couple of days later, Abraham
that's
Lincoln
stupid,
visited
you
the
know.
war-torn city. Grant
You
caught
want
up
to
to
slow
Lee
down
at
the
Appomattox
army.
Courthouse, where he
We get
trapped
it.
his forces. It was here, on April 9th, 1865, that Lee saw no point in continuing. Sir? Listen, bub. I drank a bit too much last night, and now I'm hanging like a fruit bat on a hot day. So whatever you have to say, I don't want to
Yo.
hear it. General Lee says he wants to surrender. Hot diggity dog! Grant and Lee met in the home
Diggity
of a
dog.
nearby farm family, owned by a man who had tried his best
Yo.
to escape the Civil War years earlier. Wilmer McLean. All right, can we all just hurry up and get this
Yo,
over with?
what? Yo, this dude.
Martha, not
What the fuck?
now! I'm cleaning. Do you want us to get rats? Grant and Lee, after years
So that's
of war,
why
now spoke respectfully to one another. When Lee left,
Oversimplified
his face
emphasized
filled
that
with
guy
emotion.
in the first
Grant's men
video.
began to
Okay, I
cheer,
get it.
but Grant ordered them to stop. He knew that now was the time for reconciliation. Just over 2 weeks later, General Johnson would surrender to Sherman, ending the war for 89,000 Confederate soldiers in the largest surrender of the war. Not every Confederate state had surrendered, but the war was as good as over. Across the North, church
Yeah.
bells rang out and celebrations erupted. In Washington, Lincoln gave a speech from the White House to a jubilant crowd, in which, among various things, he expressed his support for black voting rights. Lincoln had seen the nation through its deepest crisis. The presidency had visibly aged him. He had lost over 20 pounds. He said sometimes, "I think I am the tiredest man on earth." I'm not sure tiredest is a word, but geez, the man's exhausted. Cut him some slack. On a carriage ride with Mary, Lincoln
Yeah.
clearly was looking forward to being a president in a time of peace. He was apparently very cheerful, surprising his wife, and he told her that between the war and the loss of their
didn't
son,
got to
they'd both been
enjoy
very
the-
miserable. Now, it was time
You know,
to
the
be
victory.
happy. On the evening of April
He was
14th,
assassinated.
Lincoln attended a play
That
with his
shit
wife and
crazy.
some friends at Ford's Theater. It was a comedy, and the president appeared to be enjoying it very much. In a nearby bar, John Wilkes Booth swallowed 2 glasses of brandy.
Yo,
He
this
slipped
dude,
quietly
bro.
into the president's booth and awaited for the audience's laughter to rise. The president was shot in the back of the head. Booth fled the city. Soldiers carried Lincoln to a boarding house across the street. There, doctors declared
Yo, that's a lot
there
of
was nothing they could
conspiracy
do.
behind Lincoln's death,
Surrounded
you
by
know.
his heartbroken
but
wife,
not gonna
son,
delve into
and
it.
members of cabinet. At 7:22 the next morning, President Lincoln passed away. Never before had a president been murdered. A shocked nation mourned as a 12-day funeral procession carried Lincoln back to his home in Springfield, Illinois. On April 26th, Union cavalry found John Wilkes Booth in a barn in Virginia, where he was shot.
Yeah,
Not
drag
long
the
after,
rat though. Like,
Confederate President Jefferson Davis was also tracked down and arrested. Imprisoned for 2 years, he was eventually released. The North didn't want to put him on trial for fear the jury may rule that Southern secession
hang him
had
though.
in
What the
fact been
fuck?
legal. To ensure reconciliation, other Confederate generals and politicians were allowed to re-enter life in the now restored Union. Scattered fighting continued into
Okay.
May, when the last Confederate forces in Texas disintegrated. The southern states came under Northern military occupation to prevent any further rebellion, and a very difficult era of Reconstruction began. Over 3 million Americans had fought, brother against brother. The Civil War remains the bloodiest conflict in U.S.
750,000.
history, but the Union had been preserved.
Shit,
You could
bro.
say the real
That's a
winners
lot of
were
people.
those who were to never again be slaves. Further amendments passed by Congress gave black individuals the right to citizenship and to vote. Significant progress had been
Okay.
made. However, entering into the 20th century, it was clear the fight for equality would
Racism.
continue.
Yeah.
In modern America,
Slavery
the
is
man
banned,
who
but
fought to preserve the
racism.
nation and never
Don't
gave
know
up
about
in the
that.
darkest of times stands as a symbol of honesty, empathy, humility, perseverance, and courage. A continuous reminder of
Yeah.
what has forged America and what it should ever strive to be.
Yo, that is the American Civil War by Oversimplified, Bro, there seems to be there's three most highlighted general in this piece of history, in this particular history. It's General Sherman, yeah, General Grant, and then General Lee. You know, but I'm just gonna say, bro, like, props to General Lee, despite fighting in the wrong camp. You know what I'm saying? Despite fighting in the Confederate, he's actually so good. You know what I'm saying? He's actually so good. If it wasn't for the Confederate being outnumbered with men, bro, Grants wouldn't even be able to defeat the guy. I'm telling you, he's so good, just like that. Also, McClellan, though, I don't know his backstory when he was fired by Lincoln, but it seems that he switched sides like Benedict Arnold. You know what I'm saying? He switched sides to the Confederate to fight against Lincoln. So yeah. Anyway, guys, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Show me some love. Hit the bell button for post notifications. Bro, I learned a lot in this one. I learned a lot in this particular history. At first, in the first video, I didn't know anything about the American Civil War, but this one is despite being skimmed, I know there's a lot more general that was fighting in this war, but despite being skimmed a lot, I learned a lot from it. Yeah. So yeah, I'll see you guys soon.